Okay, so it's a party.
Yes.
But about TV.
Yes. Join us every Monday for TV Party, where we'll talk about the news of the moment, the best episodes of the week, and what we can't wait to find sitting on our DVRs.
We'll also chat with actors, writers, and experts about TV, elect classic characters to our Hall of Faces, deep dive into full seasons of some great shows, and more.
Find us at Consequence of Sound, iTunes, or wherever you procure fine podcasts.
Oh, Clint, one more thing. Is it open bar?
It's BYO.
Oh, got it.
Consequence Podcast Network.
Welcome to another edition of Kyle Meredith With. It's an audio interview series presented by WFPK Independent Louisville at WFPK.org, Consequence of Sound, and the Consequence Podcast Network. Wherever you're listening from, go ahead and take a second to hit the subscribe button right now so you can keep up with all the interviews that we put out every single week, whether you're listening at YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Kyle Meredith. Today, my guest, Steve Kilby of The Church. We're going to be talking about The Church's 1988 record, Starfish. It's a very big record in The Church's catalog. And Steve and I will talk about its unique sound for the time, especially fighting against the zeitgeist, as he says, how it went on to influence bands like the Smashing Pumpkins, the Killers, and Green Day, writing with ambiguity, and also the influence of Tom Verlaine from Television. And at the height of success for The Church, how Steve was suffering a bit of a nervous breakdown. It's all in here. It's Kyle Meredith with The Church.
Hello.
So I figure what we do is jump back into the time machine in 1988, which I feel like is probably a year that you get pulled back to.
Been talking about that year a lot lately. And 1987, which is the year we did it, the year we made it.
Let's go back to Starfish because, it's not only, a big moment in your career, it's still one of the greatest albums of all time. As we hear it these days, as people still talk about it, as I still listen to it, how does it sound to you these days, 30 years later? What's the effect it has on you at this point?
I think it sounds pretty good. I think there's a little, it's funny because we were learning it the other day and we were playing it back, let's have a listen to the track before. And I thought it was, it had stayed away from a lot of the things that ruined 80s records. For example, a great big snare drum going punctuating every song unnecessarily with a
right.
So it didn't have that. It didn't have the over reliance on a huge snare drum ruining every song. It doesn't have that horrible DX7 keyboard sound a lot of records had, and I don't know. Yeah, it's sort of like I think it's a record could have been made last year or could have been made in sort of 1978. It's a sort of a it's what the Church always try and do. Sort of, we try and make classic albums that could come from any time at all. We don't adhere to the zeitgeist. We're not interested in the zeitgeist. If I went in the studio now and some guy said, you got to do this and got to do this and got to do this, I'm like, I don't want to do that. I'm adhering to a classic type of rock and roll, which is the Beatles and the Stones and Dylan and Bowie. And, I want my stuff to sound like that. So, because you can still listen to those records and you can still enjoy them. But if you put on stuff that was made in a lot of stuff that was made especially in the 80s, and it's unlistenable because of the zeitgeist, because of what people thought records should sound like.
A lot of bands at that time didn't know that they were falling victim to that. But do you remember,
No, nobody does.
Yeah. How did you escape it when everybody else didn't?
C.S. Lewis, have you ever heard of him? He wrote the Chronicles of Narnia. Mm-hmm. He wrote a very famous little axiom, and he said, a lot of good men and good women have fallen victim to the zeitgeist. And he wasn't talking about music, but it's very few people are aware that they are operating within a zeitgeist. I can look at it now in 2018 and go, there was a zeitgeist going on then that was ruining things, and you and everybody else around can go, yeah, look at that. But in 1988, if you tried to talk about, I don't want to do this, I don't want to have this, I don't want this on my record, people didn't know what you meant. People couldn't understand. It's so easy with hindsight to see all this stuff, but so I was sort of fighting against it in a sort of a fog, you know what I mean? Because it was hard to find any anyone to be my ally in this fight. So I was fighting against it, and I wasn't quite aware of what was going on, except inside me something was always going, don't make a record that sounds like that. Don't have this kind of thing in your music. And very hard to articulate, and I think it always is. And I think that's what really great artists do is they rebel against the zeitgeist, and then they create their own zeitgeist or the next zeitgeist.
Which this album certainly did afterwards. I mean, the influence it's had on other bands that have sort of, taken their own versions.
I think there are bands who have been influenced by the church, and there are bands out there who admit they've been influenced by the church or really like the church. Some big bands like Smashing Pumpkins, The Killers, Green Day. I just read an interview with Mike Dirnt, and he said the best show he ever saw. I mean, that's Mike Dirnt from Green Day. He said the best show he ever saw was the church. I saw an interview with Billy Joe from Green Day. I mean, God knows. And he said, when you want to talk about a band with a two guitar attack, go no further than the church. They sort of did it all and completely mesmerized him when he was a kid. But I don't know if it's Starfish that influenced them or just everything we've ever done. I'm not sure. Probably Starfish is often the starting point for most people with the church, especially in America. Yeah, definitely.
Well, and I'll say one of the things that's always attracted me to the church is how it feels like you create an atmosphere more than a story, which I think you said that's one of the things that you do try for, that maybe you've made a career out of that. Yeah. It is.
Look, you can get a song with 3 verses, and a chorus. That's not very many words. You try and write a story with the economy that a songwriter usually has. It's really hard to do. So what you really want to do is create a sort of an ambiguous backdrop. The words becomes just some clues. So instead of here's the whole story told to you in a linear fashion like a storyteller, you just throw in some clues with the words, and then the music fleshes it all out and gives you a kind of a background. And if you're really successful, the background suits everybody who hears it. So everybody who listens to that song interprets it differently. I remember there was an aftershave being touted around about 20 years ago. It said, every man who wears it will smell different. And I thought, that's a great idea. That's what I want with my songs. Every person who hears this song will get something different out of it, and yet it will be personal to them and poignant, but whatever I intended won't contradict that. And everybody can, because I found that the music, when I first felt that happening to me, when I first felt people, like I'd hear a song and go, God, he's written this song for me. Suddenly I had this connection to something else or somebody else which was almost spiritual in its nature. And if you go along and see a band or a piece of music or any piece of art that sort of connects you to something else, and you go, I've always felt like this, but I didn't have the words to articulate it. I can't believe somebody else could have felt like that. I think that's a really important thing to pull off. And I think if the story is too precise or the instrumentation is just one thing, I think you're sort of ruining the possible ambiguity. Not everybody is working in ambiguity. Bruce Springsteen, right, I'm born in the USA, I went down to Vietnam, had to fight the yellow man. He's not, in this case, there's someone not working in ambiguity at all. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying there are many different things to do with a song, and I'm not saying ambiguity is the big be-all and end-all, but it is for me. So the one thing I'm always going for with everything I do is ambiguity, but not, you see, there's a fine line between ambiguity and meaninglessness. And a lot of people can look at really good ambiguity and go, oh, that's just meaningless. You can just write any old stuff. But that doesn't work. The ambiguity, you have to push the ambiguity as far as you can take it, but it still has to have meaning. And that's quite a sort of a trick to pull off.
I gave this compliment to another artist the other day, Kristen Hirsch from Throwing Muses, which I think is the only person I've ever said this to. And I'll throw it at you with just as much meaning that when I listen to your music, and we'll stick around with this record in particular right now with Starfish, I always don't feel like I have to hang on to every word for a lot of the reasons you're saying, because it's the feeling coming out. Obviously we can hit on the feelings of Under the Milky Way or Reptile, but especially for me lately with Antenna or Hotel Womb, these are songs that I don't think I could sit here and recite to you anything about those songs lyrically, but I can tell you how I feel about those songs and how those songs make me feel, and that's my favorite things about them.
Exactly. You know what? I discovered this. A band called the Triffids, their lead singer died. I'd been listening to one particular Triffids album that we were doing in its entirety. I was asked to sing 4 songs, and I thought, I know all those songs like the back of my hand. Why? I've listened to them 500 times each. And yet when I started singing them, I realized I didn't know the words at all. And I was surprised to find out what the words were and what was happening. And every time I'd sit down to learn the words and listen to the song, once again, the song would wash over me in this beautiful, dreamlike way. And I didn't ever realize what any of the individual words are. So that's the mark of a really good song, a song you've listened to 1,000,000 times and you still don't know what the words are. And, sometimes I don't want to know what the words are.
Right.
Some record companies say to me, let's put your lyrics on the album. I go, no, I don't want people to know the lyrics. They go, oh, yeah, but people like to read the lyrics on an album. And I go, yeah, but people would also like to know how a magician does his trick. Like, how does he get the rabbit out of his sleeve? But you don't go and tell them. You leave things, they will enjoy it more. The records I enjoy the most are the ones I still don't really know all the words to. I still don't even really know what Mick Jagger's singing in Brown Sugar. Some of that stuff I don't really want to know. I'm just happy to let it be as it is. It's sort of having I've judged that when you don't have the words in front of you and you're not necessarily conscious of what they all are. But the whole thing just kind of washes over you in this amazing way and can transport you somewhere that, as many people have said, no other art form. I mean, a picture hanging on a wall can't do that. I'm sorry, nor can a fucking poem on a page, nor can, in my humble opinion, nor can a ballet or even a film or even the best book. None of them can do what a piece of music can do, because a piece of music is something else. And even the musicians themselves don't. I've been playing bass for 50 years. I still don't know how it works. I don't know why. I don't. If I play this and why that, why does this? I'm always trying to analyze it. How does this all work? How's it all being put together? Why is it when a certain combination of notes and words and beats and it sort of hits this point, and suddenly you get those shivers up your spine and you still feel like you're in the presence of God or something. I don't know how that's done, but I'm always looking for it. Once having experienced that, once I apprehended music that could do that, I could never settle for sort of, what my brother said to me once, you hate anything that's jolly or merry. And I said, exactly. Don't ever fucking play jolly or merry music to me. I don't want to hear it.
Looking around that time, too, you had a couple of what I read anyway, were your heroes, on tour with you, Peter Murphy, Tom Verlaine, which I think a lot of the things that you're talking about could be associated with them just as much, right?
Okay, slight error there.
Uh-huh.
Tom Verlaine, yes, was my hero. Peter Murphy was not my hero, and not at all. He was just a guy. No, I didn't know much about him at all. I knew he was in a band called Bauhaus, and I'd seen him once on TV doing Ziggy Stardust, which I thought was a pretty bold move. And he was a pretty cool-looking guy, but not my hero. But Tom Verlaine definitely was, yes. And he came on tour with us, yes.
What was that like? Because, again, that's what I'm talking like. Here's someone who might have had a certain amount of influence in the way that you're talking about now. And, it's the fourth wall is cut down. The mystique is, personalized, humanized, whatever you want to say. Were those moments ever happening like that?
Oh, yeah. Tom Verlaine was the total opposite of everything I ever expected him to be. He was like a character from the old days. Even in 1988, he was like we'd go at the breakfast and he'd go, Kilby, those French fries we shared? And I go, yeah. He'd say, well, it seemed like you ate a lot more than me. So I don't see why I should go halves with you on them. You know, it was like that. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? You know what I mean? He was sort of like, he was real nickel and dime sort of guy. And he smoked a lot of cigarettes. He drank a lot of coffee, and he was very edgy and wired, and sort of, he was so suspicious of everything that almost nothing could happen. However strange he was as a person, every night when he was with us, he would come on and play lead guitar, and we'd do these 3 lengthy jams with Tom, and we'd have 3 lead guitarists, but of course our guys would defer to him. And he would just plug straight in a guitar into a Fender amp, and he was doing stuff nobody even knew how he was doing it. He had no effects pedals or anything, and he was just, having him playing with us was just incredible. It was an absolute, you know, that's definitely my career highlights, having him join us. And a lot of the audience didn't even know who he was, because the audience in 1988 had forgotten who Television were.
Which is a shame. Luckily, that came back around again. You know, I feel like history has given him the recognition, the just recognition.
Oh yeah, he's in the church's canon. Television is right up there.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people go, oh yeah, you guys really influenced by the Byrds. Yeah, the Byrds we love, but television more. Television certainly influenced me more than the Byrds. I sort of started getting into the Byrds more when everybody started telling me I sounded like the Byrds. I'd go back and listen. But definitely Television and the things they were doing with 2 guitars. And, you know, it's easy in 2008, or, you know, being a musicologist, it's easy to go, oh, yeah, a band with 2 guitarists, and they're using them sort of orchestrally, like they're playing in the spaces where the other one isn't playing, or they're using completely different tones, and they're kind of doing counterpoints and seemingly random things. Now that seems like, yeah, anyone would know that. But I tell you what, before Television, you go back, and there's an awful lot of stuff where one guy's going bum 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 ba bum ba bum ba bum ba bum, and the other guy's going playing a lead solo over the top. But going back and trying to find bands that really had this sort of 2 guitar pronged attack. And not like Wishbone Ash either, which is like harmony lead guitars. That's another thing altogether, and that's valid as well. But this is the idea of like 2 guitars doing 2 completely different pointillistic things, and the sort of the bass comes in the middle. When you hear Television, they were the first guys doing that, to my knowledge. You know, of course, the Beatles and the Stones and other people always touched on that with their 2 guitar things. But Television were like, to me, Television were a revelation, and so were the lyrics. So I was really, really impressed with that first Television album. I sucked every idea I could get out of it dry, for sure.
Just for what it's worth, side note here, I just had Roger McGuinn on the telephone yesterday. And I'll have David Crosby next week. So it's floating around there in the universe anyway. So, yeah.
Well, I have nothing. David Crosby and Roger McGuinn are absolute titans, giants, both brilliant men, brilliant songwriters, without Roger McGuinn, you've got no Tom Petty.
Right.
Roger McGuinn, I in my own sort of personal universe, I have Dylan, the Beatles, and the Stones as a triad of sort of the greats, and just slightly under that I have the Byrds weighing in because of all the stuff they brought to sort of rock and roll, in my opinion. And the first time I ever heard Turn, 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 I had like a vision, a revelation of my God, this is what music can do. It can create stuff like this. Of course, with the biblical lyrics, the whole experience is completely spiritual. And when you're 11 years old and you hear a song like that, and you sort of attune to stuff like that, it's just absolutely mind-blowing. So I just wouldn't even know. If I met those guys, I wouldn't know how to lay enough praise at their feet, because I think they're absolute fucking geniuses.
And that song still does that, by the way. Turn, Turn, Turn still has that emotion to it. Never loses
every
it.
time.
Yeah.
Every time. I know. How's that? How can someone do something and every time you hear it, it's as good as the last time, if not better? It's almost impossible. It's like a super ball that bounces the same height every time. You know, it's like what a perfect thing. In 3 minutes, these guys have created this thing that you can listen to when you're 11 or you can listen to when you're 75 and you're still going to go, fuck, that's incredible. That's quite a feat. I reckon that's amazing. No, there's not very other few things in life will last with you like that.
I'm going to pull us back just for a second, back to that 1988 era, to finish up this part, because I think you and I could probably go off on this tangent for quite a while, which is fun. As I look back on Starfish and that era, and what I read about it is, here it is, the band is 8 years in, I think, and this level of success finally gets here, but it sounds like, with most bands, when they're at their most successful, when you ask them what they remember about that time, all they say is the work I had to do. The success is almost like, just something that is created in the ether, in the press, in whatever. And the album itself lives on a parallel line beside what you're actually doing. And there was a lot of tension in the band at that point, right? So was it fun, having that success at that point? Were you able to enjoy it?
Mixed emotions, really mixed emotions. A lot of people talk about work, and we always say, well, that's why we do music, because we're not working, we're playing music. However, on that tour, I had to start doing this thing where I had to get up every morning in the town we were in and go and visit the people who sort of worked in these big record depots where, it's hard to imagine in this day and age, but in those days you go to these underground bunkers and there'd be thousands of records and people moving them around and cataloguing them, counting them and supplying all the record shops. I had to go and do that every morning. And one morning I did it and I was so tired. I was crying. I was like having a nervous breakdown. I was crying. I was going, I can't do it. I can't do this. And people go, hi, Steve. I love Starfish. Great. And I go, oh, my God. Hey, that's great, man. I saw you last night at the thing. You were great. I'm standing there crying. And that was hard work. That was hard work. It's sort of like accumulated jet lag. We had this tour schedule where we were flying around. We would fly from Helsinki to Rome to Minneapolis, back to England, down to Adelaide in Australia, and then back to New York and then into Minneapolis again. And you get out the plane and you didn't know what fuck was going on. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. The roadies everyone was so tired. The roadies were crying. I remember one morning on a Finnair flight, and our Australian roadie sitting up the front with all these Finnish businessmen who were flying from fucking Helsinki to Stockholm for the day, 8:30 in the morning, and this roadie's sitting there weeping because he's just so tired and he can't carry on, doing all this work. So that's what I remember. I remember that. I also remember that the conflict in the band had escalated and we weren't very nice to each other. I wasn't nice to them. They weren't nice to me, and they weren't nice to each other either. So there was there was always a kind of some sort of current of somebody's done something or somebody said something, or you know what I mean. But there was the fame, there was the success, there was all of that stuff. Suddenly, some real adulation and sort of, people treating you like you're fucking Joe Superstar. All that happened. There was a lot of stuff happened at once. I think I didn't handle it very well. I think I could have handled it worse than I did, but I didn't handle it very well. If it had happened to me the way I feel now, I think I would have handled it a lot better. But at the time, it was sort of like, it was so much sort of information and questions and sort of ethics and morals and sort of substance abuse and traveling and jet lag and hotels. And, it's like, wow. We had a girl from Arista following us around, on our bus, making sure we had to do everything. And this is a terrible thing to say about myself. She said I was so rude, I never learned her name. I just used to say, hey, Arista, what are we doing now? Hey, Arista, take me. You know what I mean? Like, what the fuck was I thinking? What the hell? What planet was I on that I was behaving like that?
It's, just how rare it is that we get to celebrate our accomplishments in the moment because of all the things that you're saying. And even what you were saying earlier about, the hindsight with the zeitgeist and everything. Congratulations on 30 years of Starfish. Okay. And I've loved the new record as well, Man, Woman, Life, Death, Infinity. I can't wait for the next one. See you.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, my thanks to Steve Kilby of The Church, talking about 1988's Starfish. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now, whether you're listening on YouTube, through a podcast, or even on Spotify. After that, you can head over to WFPK.org. That's where I do a show every Monday through Thursday from noon to 3 Eastern, where you'll also find some bonus episodes of this series. I'm Kyle Meredith. I'll see you next time.
Consequence Podcast Network.